Welcome to Unplanned and Untold, a podcast that dives into the real-life, unexpected twists of facing an unplanned pregnancy in college. Join us as we listen to the unplanned and untold stories of those who have overcome the odds in order to achieve their goals. Welcome back to another episode of Unplanned and Untold. I'm your host, Caitlin Willing, and today we have an incredible guest whose unplanned pregnancy set the stage for her future career path. At 19, while still in college, Kiona's unplanned pregnancy ultimately led her to discovering her passion and purpose as a doula. She now dedicates her life to supporting and empowering other mothers through their birth journeys. Kiona also hosts her own podcast called Birth as We Know It, where women from all walks of life are invited to share their birth stories to help normalize and recognize the different ways in which birth can unfold. Kiona, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to be here and I just can't wait to dive into all the details.
I am super excited. A few reasons. Number one, I love interviewing other podcasters because
Yes.
you make this dance so easy.
Isn't it so fun? Because you're like, I know what goes behind all of this. So.
Everyone's stories need to be heard, but not everyone is super comfortable with articulating it on a
Right.
podcast or a video. But my podcast girls, man, it's just smooth sailing. So I'm super excited for that.
Yes.
And also meeting you at Podfest, excuse me, and getting to hear a little bit of your story there. Oh, just super cool that we end up bumping into each other and sharing our stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I loved running into you guys at Podfest because I was like, okay, from what I know, I'm the only birth kind of pregnancy related podcast here. And I'm like messaging, like, is there anybody else out there? And so I was super happy that we were able to like just get lunch and get to know each other a little bit more. That was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. It's a niche for sure. What we do
Yes.
is a niche. And you're coming to us from where do you live now?
I live in Auburn, Washington.
Auburn,
So
Washington, not
yeah.
Auburn, Alabama. For all of our listeners, the majority of them come from Auburn, Alabama. We have a Washington girl here.
Yes.
Really
Yes.
cool. I actually recently went to Washington. My brother-in-law signed with the Mariners company.
Oh,
And holy moly, I don't know if you're a Twilight fan. I was when I was in high school, but I was just blown away with they filmed Twilight there, right?
right. Yeah. In Forks. Yep.
In Fort. It's just so crazy. And so my poor Uber driver, I was just bubbling over with all the questions. I'm sure she was annoyed by the end of it, but it's wild just to see the amount of greenery y'all have and like the dreariness too. It all matched everything that was in the movie and
Yeah.
the series.
Yeah. It's super awesome for like movie locations and things. I will say that it's a little sad to be
Yeah.
in the gray all the time.
Yes.
So when it's summer here, everybody is out and everything is going on. But it's so much fun. I love the Pacific Northwest. I love
Yeah.
the greenery. I love it all. I
Wow.
don't know what it's like to live in a flat state. Like that's so odd to me. But hey, it's awesome. We'll get through it, right? Like one step at a time.
Yeah, I'm the polar opposite out here in Arizona. Out here in Phoenix is hot as Hades most of the year, and there is no greenery to be seen other than cacti.
Right, right.
Well, I want to jump into your story. You have a very unique story, and you got pregnant super young. So, set the stage for our listeners. How young were you and your now husband when you found out you were pregnant?
Yes. So I was in my second year of college. I was a sophomore, but I was 19. And my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, but from now on will just be my husband. My husband was 18 years old and a senior in high school. So we were itty bitty babies.
Babies. I can't even imagine what you were thinking in that moment, finding out that you were pregnant. So, where were y'all living? What did life look like that young with him being in high school and then you being in college?
Yeah, so I was actually living with him and his father. So my senior year of high school is when we started dating. He was a
Okay.
sophomore, and I was like, ew, I'm dating a baby because the age feels so big back then, right? Like
Yes.
in high school, it feels like it's such a big deal. But
Yeah.
I just fell head over heels for him, and he was so romantic and so sweet. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna live with you when I can. So we lived together, and I lived with his dad,
Okay.
and we were really young when we found out, and we were surprised when we found out that I was pregnant. But at the same time, we weren't, because I wouldn't say that she was a mistake or like necessarily an accident either, because it was definitely unplanned, but we weren't doing anything to prevent it at that time. I had stopped taking birth control, not on purpose. It was just
Right.
like, okay, I'm like, I'm in college. I'm going to make smarter decisions. Like at that time, I was at Seattle Pacific University, which is a private Christian university. And I was like,
Okay.
I'm just going to find my way back to God, and I'm going to like reverse this thing. And I'm no longer going to sin, like I'm not going to have sex anymore. And we're going to do this. And then that didn't last very long, because,
Mm,
weekends came around and I was like,
sure.
you're looking kind of good over there. So, we just ended up having a surprise pregnancy, and I was so naive. Like I
Mm,
did not know anything about pregnancy, birth, or anything like that. So when we found out, this is going to sound kind of crazy, but or silly. Obviously, like when you hear this, it is a young mind speaking.
sure.
I was like, okay, we just got done having sex and I peed on this pregnancy stick and it says yes. Like there must be semen on this or something. Because I'm like, this doesn't add up right now.
Right. How could it be
um,
positive so quick?
yeah, yeah. So it was a shocker for us.
I bet. So how do your parents react? I mean, I cannot imagine how scared you probably were having to tell his father that you were living with that y'all are now expecting.
Hmm. Yeah, so it was interesting because literally I remember the day we found out. It was 12, 12, 12. So I was like, oh my God, we have to tell everybody. And I found out, or as soon as we found out, we actually told his father. I think he was one of the last people to find out of the people that I told, because I was super nervous. I wanted to tell my family first because my family had children at really young ages. So like my
Okay.
grandma had her first when she was 16. My mom
Okay.
had her first when, she had all three of my sisters, me and my sisters, by the time she was 21. So it was like boom, boom, boom. And I was like,
Yep.
okay, let me tell my family first, because they're kind of used to hearing this news.
Right.
So telling my family was hard. My mom was like, oh my God, yeah, I'm gonna have a grandbaby. This is so awesome. And my dad was like not the opposite, but he wasn't like excited because I'm in college
College.
trying
Yeah.
to do things and like with my life. He's like, I just
Absolutely.
want you guys to graduate high school and then you could do what you want after that. And of course, he always encouraged college. And like now, me, his youngest, or actually his middle child, being pregnant at such a young age, he's like, oh my God. He's like, I'm not mad at you.
Right.
He's like, I'm just really disappointed.
Mm,
And that hurts to hear,
mm.
because it's not like that angry, like, what the heck, you're so
Yep.
stupid. It's like, oh, like I'm so disappointed.
Sometimes
But
it's worse. Sometimes that
yeah,
reaction, because it just hits you in your heart and you're like, I have let you down. I'd rather you just
right.
yell at me and be angry and let's move on. But
I
that
know.
whole like, you have disappointed me. It just, oh,
Yeah. Ugh, it just hurts so bad. And then, but
mm,
it was quickly followed by, I'm disappointed, but I will support you. We got your back.
awesome.
You are not gonna, we're not just gonna throw you to the curb. Like, we're
Right.
gonna make this happen. And he's like, one thing that I absolutely want for you is I want you to finish college. And I was like, oh, absolutely. Like, I want to, I'm super determined. I'm like, I already know as soon as I pee on this stick, like there is no other option but for me to
Right.
be parenting this baby. Like I
Okay.
am a mom now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then when we told my husband's parents, it was more of like disappointment, shock, and surprise, because I'm pretty sure his mom had no idea that he was sexually active.
Ah,
And his parents are separated. So when we
okay.
went to tell his mom, we actually stopped down the street from her house to pick up his best friend so she could come with us.
Oh
I
my
don't
God.
know why he thought this was a good idea.
Like a buffer or something for
Yeah,
this
I don't know.
conversation?
Yeah, he wanted his best friend there. His best friend and his girlfriend at the time came with us, and we like just went to his mom's house. It was super late too. It was like 10 p.m. or
Oh my
something.
God.
I know. And we told her and she was like, well, what do you mean? And he's like, Kiona's pregnant. And she's like, what do you mean? And like that's pretty much like all she was saying. And then she was just kind of shocked. Um, and then we told her, and she's like, well, maybe you'll give the baby up for adoption, or maybe you could just give the baby away, do something like have an abortion. You're too young, da da da. And like, of course, like as I'm hearing this, I'm like, oh, jab, 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 like
Mm-hmm.
all of this stuff. I made it very clear that I was parenting this baby. Um, and then when we told his dad, we broke the number one rule in his house. He was like, you can live here. That's totally fine. I don't mind that at all. But he was like, you just can't get pregnant.
Oh my word. So I can see why you were very nervous to tell him,
Yeah.
having broken that one golden rule.
Right. And I was like, ooh. And at first, like, I was like, oh, that's easy. No worries. Like,
Don't
I'm on
worry, we're
birth
not gonna have sex.
control.
Yeah,
Yeah. Like, I mean, I knew, like, when I was on birth control, we were getting down. Like, like, we were in high school. We were like rabbits, but I didn't think about it.
right.
Um, And so when I got off birth control, I was like thinking that I could be strong, like my inner will be strong. But like, anybody listening to this, and once you know that feeling, you want that feeling.
It's very hard
And
to put the cat back in the bag.
right, yeah, literally. Like
Mhm.
it's so, so hard.
Yeah.
And so we ended up pregnant. And when I told him, he was like, all right, you guys got to move out. And I was like, oh, Shiza, like, oh my God.
The things we
Okay.
don't think about so young making these decisions and the ripple
Right.
effect.
Right. Exactly.
So, where do you go from here as far as college is concerned? I mean, you're in your first few trimesters of pregnancy. Were you having symptoms?
My biggest symptom was fatigue. I
Okay.
was like knocked out. Like, so when I
Um,
found out I was pregnant, it was at the beginning of winter quarter.
okay.
And I actually ended up withdrawing from winter quarter because I was taking super hard classes. At that time, I wanted to do prerequisites for like nursing because my
Okay.
dream was to work with moms and babies. And I was like,
Oh,
okay, I'm going to be an OB nurse, right? Like that's the thing that's the only thing that made sense in my mind.
okay.
Um, and I was like, ooh, I can't wake up for these 8 o'clock classes.
Right.
So I decided, let me withdraw. Like I'm not withdrawing from school altogether. It's just like, okay, I need a break. I'll hop back on next term. We'll see how things go. And so I withdrew and I pretty much slept my entire like those 3 months away.
Wow.
Yeah. And what a privilege that is, I just have to
Right.
say,
Right.
to be able to like have a roof over my head. We were still living with my husband's dad at the time.
Okay.
And he was just like, yeah, you can do whatever. And like, of course, he never made us pay rent or anything like that. But
Right.
I was like, well, I don't want to just sit here and eat your food, or let me like clean the house and like, do laundry or whatever, do
Yeah.
my part as I can as this young pregnant person.
Wow.
Um, so
Eventually, do you go back to college?
I do, yeah. So I actually went back to college the following term.
Okay.
So I was like, this fatigue is starting to go away. I'm really bored, but I was nervous to go back to school because, like I said, it was a Christian university, a private Christian university,
Okay.
and I was not married. And I was feeling the the judgment, which was
Mm,
really unfortunate because
mm,
you really don't want to feel that, you
yeah.
don't want to even think about what other people feel about you really.
Right. Yeah.
And so when I went back to school, I had a belly, like it wasn't huge yet, but I was obviously showing.
Right.
And I just decided to take easy classes. I didn't want my time to go to waste, and I just wanted it to go towards something. And with all majors or whatever, you need some kind of like artsy or whatever, like
Sure.
writing or something that, well, writing isn't artsy, but it could be.
It could be.
Um, anyways, I did end up going back to school and I did get some judgment. There was actually a woman who came up to me when I was a little bit further along in my pregnancy near the end of this semester. I think I was like 7 months pregnant at the time.
Wow.
And she came up to me, and I just remember it was like this small Asian lady, and she was wearing a red trench coat of all
Mm,
things. And she came up to me and she was like, do you know Jesus?
mm,
And I was like, okay, man. Like, y- you know, this is kind of interesting. I'm trying to give her the benefit of the doubt and being like, oh, okay, you're not judging me or whatever. But I'm just like, yeah, we're homies, man. But I gotta go to school. I gotta go to class, you know?
Yes. At that moment, I can only imagine how you felt like you were like an ant under a microscope,
Yeah.
essentially, that everyone is
Mhm.
looking at you, looking at the belly. And I understand a lot of times people don't know what to say in that
Mhm.
moment, but sometimes people choose some of the most hurtful things to say
Mhm.
and judgments are passed that we don't align with. But that I feel like we battle. I mean, you remember that memory still to this day. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting how we remember those moments that we felt so small and so judged and how they affected us and how I hope in today's world we are trying to educate people on how to react to women in
Right.
these situations. And yes, we all make mistakes in life. All of us do. It's just when it's an unplanned pregnancy, you've got that outward showing of
Right.
what happened. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And it's like for the world to see, which is so hard.
Yeah, it is. It's absolutely hard. And I bet I can like almost guarantee that 90% of the time I wasn't getting judged, right? Like everything was fine. I was like just this normal student and people were like, oh, "Okay, cool, pregnant, whatever." Like people could care less. But when there were those moments, excuse me, when there were those moments when judgment came, it felt like a dagger.
Mm,
It just felt like a dagger because I also happen to work at the library where students come in and out and they see me
sure.
waddling around doing all this stuff. And there was even one professor who has said, "Oh, I don't see a ring on your finger." And I'm like, "Yeah, there's not one."
Man, and it's like, what am I supposed to say? You know what I
Right,
mean? Like,
right.
it is so
Yeah.
wild. So eventually you do have your daughter
Mhm.
and you still go back to school after having her. How old was she when you went back?
She was 4 months old when I went back to school.
Oh,
Yeah, because I was just like, "Mm, this is I can't do this. I'm going stir crazy." Because you're
right.
sleep deprived, and
Yes.
my husband was working at the time, and he was, like, doing his part in, like, trying to provide, right? He's like, "I have a family. I'm trying to provide." He always worked, and he would switch jobs often, but
Okay.
his technique was he would only switch if he was getting paid more. And
Mhm.
so he would work the same amount of hours and he's like, okay, I'm putting in my time here and I'm even if it's just 25 cents, 50 cents more, I'm going to provide for my family just a little bit more. So
Right.
it was awesome. He's always been super strong-willed and dedicated. But
Huge.
yeah, so I did go back to school and I even had amazing professors. And when I
Okay.
did go back to school, I actually transferred from SPU to the University of Washington, Bothell.
Okay.
And I liked it better because there were smaller classes, more variety of like individuals, like it was
Okay.
more diverse, and there was different options for classes that I could took. So when I
Okay.
went, I had a couple of amazing professors that let me bring her with me to class.
Wow.
Yeah, it was super awesome.
Oh my word. And so she would just chill in her little carrier and your teachers were fine with it.
Yeah, and she was such a good baby. Like, I
Wow.
breastfed her, so, like, if she did any little or
Right.
whatever, I was like, "All right, on to the boob you go, and we're just gonna keep on doing this." So
Wow, I commend you because even bringing your child, I mean, having the big belly on campus, that's hard. But then even bringing your baby with you, I mean, that's a sure tell sign that, okay, like she's got a baby and she's in college. And for you to be brave enough to do that and to have the support from your professors at that
Mhm.
time is mind blowing, absolutely mind blowing that they made, accommodations for you.
Yeah, yeah, and it was super awesome, and I was definitely one, if not the only person that I saw on campus with a newborn or a
Yep.
baby, so I did feel like I was standing out, but I kind of looked at it as when people look in at me, they have 2 options. They could look and judge, or they can be like, "Man, she's working really hard to
Yes,
get what she needs," and I was like, "I'm just gonna
absolutely.
choose that that's what everybody's thinking."
I love that
Uh,
mindset shift. That's
yeah.
huge. So I want to go back to you having your daughter because that was
Mhm.
a pivotal moment in your life and kind of changed your career trajectory. So talk me through what about her birth really inspired you to become a doula?
Yes. Oh my gosh, I love this question so much because her birth really changed my mindset on life. I'm sure there are many listeners that you have that will understand when I say having a child gives you a different purpose.
Mhm.
And, you know, there are people, especially when having children really young, you always hear, oh, your life is going to be over, like how,
Yeah.
like everything's going to change for you. But it's more of like a negative, like tone.
Mhm.
It was complete opposite for me. Like when I was going through her birth process, you know, it's unknown. I've never done it before. I'm over here being like, okay, this is what I want out of my birth. Like I really want like an unmedicated vaginal birth. And like I'm working hard and doing all of these things. And I had no idea what a birth doula was at this time, like
Okay.
at all. And so this is the time pre-COVID where you could have as many people in the room as you wanted. So I'm a party birther. I like to call it party birthing. I love having everybody in the space. And even at one point, my husband's best friend was in there, and I was like, if he's in there, he might see some parts you might not want him to see. And so my husband was like, yeah, he can get out. Um, but to the main point of this is during my birth, there was so much chaos going on around me. And
Okay.
not even just from the people that were invited into the space, but like, you
Okay.
know, the beeping of the machines and the
Yeah.
doctors and everything that's just unknown. And when you're in labor, you go into this zone.
Mm.
And I was really trying to find a way to get back into my zone. And then my
Yeah.
bonus mom, Mirla, came and she was the quiet voice.
Wow.
There was everything else was kind of loud and I was like trying to get in the zone and she was just there and she was like praying for me and she was like, you know, guiding me and saying, you're so good, you're so strong, like you can
Mm.
do this, like listen to your body. And I was like, "Ah, this is exactly what I need to hear, you know?"
Mm.
And so it felt so good to hear how quiet she was and how
Right.
calm she was and how like unchaotic it needed to be or in order for me to like make progress and trust myself. Because, you know, everybody that has had a goal to have an unmedicated birth, I'm sure that there's an inkling of when it's available. You're like, oh, I think I might cave and get this
Yeah.
pain medication.
Yeah.
Um, but her quiet voice is what pushed me into continuing through and not getting the medication. And so I had an amazing birth. It was great.
Wow. Just to hear your bravery during birth, I mean, I was the complete opposite. I didn't know what to expect. I I I never had a conversation with my mom about what childbirth was like. I mean, it was just complete fear of the
Mm,
unknown
mhm.
and not having that doula explaining things or calming me. I can only imagine how much of a difference having a doula makes during childbirth.
It's a big difference. And I mean, I'm not saying this just because I am a birth doula, but like it truly makes a difference when you have someone cheering you on and when you have someone who you have met prior to going into your birth space. So,
Wow. So
yeah.
when did you make the transition so you have your daughter, now you are like, "This is what I wanna do." How do
Mhm.
you make that transition after having your daughter?
Yeah, so as soon as I had her, I knew that I wanted to be in the birth space because the experience I had was so phenomenal. And, you know, of course, there's some parts that are a little like challenging to think about, but I try to focus on the positive. And when I focus on the positive, I decided, okay, I need to do this birth doula training. I had a really awesome nurse family partnership nurse that was there with me. I don't know if you guys have that program over there. I'm sure maybe possibly, but um, it was really cool because I would talk to her about like my desires of like really wanting to get into birth work. And I was talking about midwifery, like going in to become a midwife.
Right.
And she was like, oh, well, have you heard of a doula? And I was like, no, what is that? And so she sent me out these resources. And it's basically someone who is there to physically, mentally, and emotionally support someone as they are in labor. So they're
Okay.
supported throughout their pregnancy, labor, and birth. And I was like, oh, okay, I could do that. Like, you know, it's like a weekend training versus a degree at this point. And I was like, this is a good stepping stone to give me an idea of what the on call life is like. And so I took a training when my daughter had just turned 1. So that's when I decided to to dive
Made
into
that
that.
transition.
Yeah.
Wow. And then a couple things in life happen that kind of rock you. COVID happens, which rocks us all.
Hmm.
And how far into your program were you when the whole world shuts down?
Yeah. So that is actually when I was in midwifery school. Yeah,
Wow.
so I was a birth doula, still am a birth doula, but I was practicing as a birth doula for a few years. And
Okay.
then I decided, okay, now I want to take the next step. And I transitioned into becoming a birth assistant, which is a midwife's assistant for out of hospital midwives.
Okay.
And that's like you do just a tiny bit more of like clinical things, like you do vitals. Sometimes you can like draw up Pitocin and administer the Pitocin to the patient or client.
Yes.
And so I was like, okay, this is a cool stepping stone to get me an idea. And then when I was in midwifery school, everything was super awesome. I had the opportunity to catch two amazing babies, which is so
Wow.
fun.
So
Um,
crazy.
yeah, it was awesome. But then COVID hit,
Yeah.
and I was 2.5 years into my 4-year program at that
Wow.
time.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow. And then another jarring incident happens, the death of George Floyd. I know
Mhm.
that impacted your story greatly. Talk me through what that stirred up in your heart.
Yeah, man, it just stirred so much up because one, I'm Black, Native, and Mexican American, and I have so not just two, but I'm thinking of two, but I have amazing Black African males in my life, right? My
Right.
father being one of them,
Mhm.
and my uncle being another, and then my grandfather. And so I'm thinking, oh my gosh, is my family safe? Like,
Right.
is my family safe in this situation? My uncle actually only lived 1 mile away from where George Floyd had died.
Wow.
And that impacted a lot of my mental health because I wasn't just dealing with like the Black Lives Matter movement. I was also dealing with like really intense classes at that time in
Yeah.
midwifery school, on top of COVID, on top of being at home with my kids while they are in school, so balancing all of these things, that really made me think about, okay, there has to be a different kind of training to prepare people
Mm,
going into this birth work
right.
because the birth doula training I took was great, but there was nobody that looked like me in that space. There was nobody that
Interesting.
looked like me that was teaching those things at that time.
Wow.
And so it just made me think of how much more effort I had to put forward as a birth worker of color in the
Absolutely.
space, like how much advocacy I needed to put forth for my clients.
Absolutely. I mean, it does make a difference. It is a piece of just comfort knowing, that you can culturally relate to somebody else and that they see you and they see your needs and they hear your needs. And during your training, did you feel like this world, of midwifery and, all the doula training, was it culturally as inclusive as you thought it was going to be?
No, it was not. And that was one of the reasons why I was pushing through my hardest to like actually get through midwifery school is because
Mm,
there are not many midwives of color, especially
wow.
here in Washington State. There are some amazing ones now because they have like graduated and they're doing things. So that is slowly shifting,
Okay.
but there definitely needs to be more work put into the education aspect of like cultural inclusivity.
Absolutely. So
Mhm.
I want to circle back because I know we alluded to our listeners about your now husband.
Mhm.
When did y'all get married? How old was your daughter?
Yes, so we got married in 2015. My daughter was 2.
Oh my
Yeah.
goodness.
Yeah.
And, having an unplanned pregnancy so young, that takes such a toll on any relationship. Even if you have this
Mhm.
most solid of solid relationships, y'all were babies.
Mhm.
And your marriage is thriving now. So my question is, how have you and your husband managed to maintain such a strong relationship through all of the different challenges each of you faced?
Oh my gosh. It's just communication, really. And
Mm.
I know that sounds super cliche, but it's
No.
literally like communication. And I personally don't understand how there are marriages out there or couples out there where people don't tell each other everything. Like my husband is like my best friend and like I
Oh,
will like try to surprise him with something. I'm like, I can't even wait. Like I got you shoes or something.
yeah.
So it's communication and there's trust and it's
Mhm.
just really having to also do a lot of self-work because
Mm.
my husband and I grew up in completely different environments. He is an only child and I am one of 6. So
Wow.
needing to like think about how we're parenting our children as well
Yes.
as, diving into like what we're bringing from our own, like the way in which we were parented into our parenting styles. Like it's so interesting and different. And
Yes.
it's just truly, truly communication.
Absolutely. And my final question to you would be it's a hard one,
Okay.
but getting pregnant so young and kind of staying the course over the years, do you feel like because you chose to parent your daughter and walk through that unplanned pregnancy, that that has helped you when being a doula now? Has that experience shaped you into who you are today?
100%. Yes, absolutely. I literally have no idea what direction my life would have taken if I had not had her because she has navigated this passion. She like just reinstilled and deepened this purpose for me
Mm.
because like I said before, I always knew I wanted to work with moms and parents and babies. I wanted to be in that space. And I was the 8-year-old that was like begging people to like, can I change your baby's diaper? Can I feed your baby? And
Yes.
so having my own little human to like raise and care for really truly reinstilled that passion and drive. And I was like, if I can do this, I should be able to help other people do this. Like, I am by no means any kind of expert. I am a lifelong learner,
Wow.
and I just wanna provide that support for other people because the support that I did get made such a big difference in my even, like, my self-esteem, like, in
Mm.
my own thoughts of, like, how and where I will get to where I wanna be in my life. So, just being that small voice, just like you were mentioning before, those small moments that we remember throughout our pregnancies, like, the things that stick with us, like, how we're treated and how we're cared for really changes things. So, I wanted to do and still want to do all that I can to make sure that people are seen, heard, valued, and supported in the way that they need to be supported.
Kiona, your story is so, so inspiring. I mean, you embraced your unplanned pregnancy fully and have really leaned into your calling as a doula. And y'all, if you have not listened to her podcast, you need to because she has some amazing, amazing birth stories on there. So thank you so much for coming on and opening up your heart and sharing your story with all of our listeners today.
Yes, absolutely. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And to all of our listeners, we hope to have you back on our next episode of Unplanned and Untold. Bye bye. We hope you enjoyed that episode, as we are committed to bringing you the real, raw stories of those who have defied the odds and achieved their goals. But we're not stopping there. We are dedicated to improving our podcast quality so that we can reach an even wider audience. If you believe in the power of these untold narratives, consider donating or sponsoring this podcast by visiting unplannedanduntold.com.